Okay. Good evening. I want to welcome you tonight to Book 3 of Mere Christianity. And welcome tonight. Welcome those online as well. Dr. Markos is here, and he'll be sharing with us about Mere Christianity tonight, Book 3. For those online, at the end, we will have some questions and answers. And if you have any questions, you can text them to 832-607-9951. 832-607-9951. And we will read off your questions as well for Dr. Markos. Let's pray together. Eternal God and our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for you, and we thank you for Dr. Markos and his ministry at HBU and literally all around the world. We thank you for his writing, and we thank you that he's here with us tonight. And bless our time together as we look at the works of C.S. Lewis. In the name of Jesus we gather. Amen. So give Dr. Markos a warm welcome.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're live. Oh, okay. And and then this morning or this afternoon, right after church, I left and drove out to Second Baptist West Campus and spoke to them about Mere Christianity. So this is the third Mere Christianity speech. So I never get tired of that. It's really wonderful. And now you notice I've brought it back. Now there's two reasons. Okay, the first reason is it is my signature outfit. People have requested it, but I don't know if you know the other reason. Okay, I heard a rumor that there might be a talent scout in the audience. And now that Daniel Craig has retired, I'm auditioning for the new James Bond. Okay, so just look out for it, the next one, okay? But I mean, anyway, so, oh my gosh. Well, last month, we did Mere Christianity Part 1 and 2, which a lot of you were probably fairly familiar with. But I'm glad that I'm going to get to do Mere Christianity 3 today and Mere Christianity 4 next month because people are less aware of those parts. I know myself, I don't get a chance to speak on that as much because most people want this apologetics. But Mere Christianity 3 is very important specifically for Christians because it's about how do you live the moral, ethical Christian life? How do you live a life of virtue? What does it mean? Now, I've said before that Lewis was an atheist for the first half of his life, and he really didn't want God around. And this was basically Lewis's idea. You know, I'm not going to do any big sins, right? But just God, leave me alone, okay? I don't like those meddling gods, okay? Morality to the young Lewis and even the adult Lewis only meant God getting in my way. Just mind your own business and leave me alone. Right? And a lot of people have that idea of morality. It's a negative morality of people getting in our face. But no, morality is the way that allows the human machine to run properly. And so we're going to have a positive view of morality and virtue today. Not just a thou shalt not, but God gives us moral strictures and virtue so we can be healthy, right? So we can live and function the way he created us to function. And really, who knows how to function properly? The one who created you, right? And we actually have a manual. It's called the Bible. Yay, right? All right. Now, to help us understand this, Lewis gives a simple but really memorable illustration of a fleet of ships, right? So imagine I'm in the fleet of ships and I'm going along. And I'm trying to get somewhere. Well, what needs to happen in order for the ships to arrive safely? One thing is you have to make sure the ships don't collide with each other, right? And for most Americans, that's the only morality they want. How many of your friends say this? Hey, how many of your friends say this? I can do anything I want as long as I don't hurt anybody, right? I mean, and that is part of morality. Part of that's kind of a social morality. Don't step on anyone's toes, don't invade their rights, don't hurt them, etc., etc. But there's more to morality than that. And there's more to the ship analogy. Because think about it. Yes, stop the ships from colliding with each other. But you also have to make sure that each ship is in tip-top shape. Because if the ships fall apart, they will actually eventually collide with each other. So there's also a personal morality that makes a difference. If we are going to run properly and not give out in the middle of the ocean, then we also need rules that are personal. And how many of you have lived in Houston long enough to remember the Enron fiasco? Oh, there we go. And you were there. And what did we all learn about that? We learned that there's no such thing as a victimless crime. Because, I'm just doctoring the books. Who gets hurt? Well, you probably had at least one person in this church that lost their job, and they had nothing to do with Enron. There we go. My church, everything. So that's the second. But there's a third, and this is the one we really don't think about. Those ships also have to have a fixed destination. They need to know where they're going, how to get there, etc., or they'll just wander around in the middle of the ocean till they all die. Now, the Greeks had a word for that, Aristotle, and that word was telos or telos, and it means a purposeful end. Now, you can say that in our language as well. If I say, what is the end of my course, I don't mean when does my course end. I mean, what is the purpose? Why do you take this class? What do you want to learn? So we kind of have that word too. The word end includes that, but telos is just a little more powerful word, and of course it's Greek, so we want to hear it, right? I mean, especially when I'm speaking at a Presbyterian church, if I don't teach them at least one Greek word, they don't feel like they've heard a sermon. They throw me out, okay? I need it, even if I make it up, they need at least one Greek word. So anyway, especially if they went to seminary, right? So, no French words, but a lot of Greek words. Okay, they're back here again. Okay, so anyway, the vive la différence. That's the best thing the French ever said. Vive la différence. Anyway, the telos means they need to know where they're going, right? And we need to know where we're going, what our purpose is. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? If we don't know what our sexuality is for, let's say, we are going to misuse it and corrupt it and even damage it, right? If we don't know what marriage is for, it may fall apart, right? If we don't know what church is for, well, we have a lot of problems, don't we? We don't know what church is for, right? So you need to know. And what I love about Mere Christianity, Book 3, is that half of what Lewis says is actually in Aristotle. Because Aristotle got a lot of things right. Aristotle obviously didn't know how one finds salvation in Christ, but he understood and got right basic understanding of virtue and morality. A good example people use, let's say there's a nail sticking out of here. If I have a hammer, boom, boom, boom. But what if I'm holding a Stradivarius? Do you know what a Stradivarius is? I'd be impressed. I mean, you know what it is? Yeah, it's one of the most perfect musical instruments ever made. It's a violin. Now, if I'm holding that Stradivarius and I don't know what its true purpose is, I might take it and go bang, bang, bang. Did any of the musicians in the room go like that? Right? You would destroy it, even non-musicians. I mean, you would destroy it if you don't know what its proper function is. You will destroy it, right? So morality also has to do with who we are, what we were made for. And again, the person that knows what we're made for is our Creator. And the one that wrote the manual, how to do it, is God, and we have the Bible. So we need to keep those in mind if we're to understand virtue. But again, we no longer know what our purpose is. We don't even know what the purpose of our sexuality, our bodies, anything. We're so confused. And the confusion has gone like that, okay? I'm sorry, I was just thinking of, what was that guy's name? Clinton, what was Clinton's running mate? Al Gore, yeah, with his global warming. It's like, like that. Well, that's actually what's happened in terms of insanity in the last 5 years. It's like, we just forgot what a human being is. I mean, oh my gosh. So we got to get back to brass tacks. Now, if you asked anybody before the modern period, what are these virtues that are so important to the human life and the Christian life? They would have told you there are 7 virtues. And I might have even talked about this here once before. There are the 4 classical virtues, and there are the 3 theological virtues. And on Friday, I'm driving over to McNeese State University. You know where that is? It's in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And I'm going to talk about the virtues, just on the virtues, okay? But for now, just go quickly. The classical virtues are courage and self-control and wisdom or prudence and justice. And those four classic virtues, the reason they're called that is because even the pagans had access to them. People like Aristotle and Plato and Cicero, what we call the virtuous pagans, Dante calls them, they were able to practice them, not in a salvific manner, but to practice them in a real manner. But the three theological virtues are the ones that awaited the fuller revelation of Christ and the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 13, these three things remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Now, I'm not telling you that the ancient Greeks and Latins didn't have a word for faith, hope, and love, but they couldn't understand the fullness of it or practice the fullness of those virtues apart from the special revelation of Christ. By the way, just in case you're wondering, because I got to do some Greek words again, faith, hope, and love. In the King James, it says faith, hope, and charity, right? Like the gangsters, right? Faith and hope stole all the money, and they gave it to charity. Okay. But the reason, there we go, that was a slow one. The reason we say, I love it, hey, she's back. The reason we like to say love is because charity is a beautiful word, but over the last 150 years, it's had its meaning reduced. So for most people, charity only means giving to the poor. Well, that's part of love, but that's not the fullness of it. Charity is actually a direct transliteration out of Latin of caritas. And caritas is the Latin version of agape. Now, most Americans will recognize the Latin word before the Greek word every time, except for this time. And the reason is because every one of us has heard that sermon about the three Greek words for love. Have you given it? Oh, come on, you have to give it next time, right? Eros, erotic love, philia, friendship love, and agape, God's self-giving love. So that's really what charity used to mean, caritas or agape, but again, we say love because it's a little bit confusing to most people. Now, again, maybe next year I'll come back and talk about those virtues more specifically. But what I want to talk about now, and what Lewis talks about, is just what is virtue in general? What is a virtue? How do you practice a virtue? And the definition Lewis gives in Book 3 is a virtue is not a feeling. It's a quality of character that you gain by practicing just and virtuous actions. Or, as Aristotle said, virtue is a habit. Now, I'm not making fun of feelings here. Feelings are important. But virtue is not simply a feeling. All right, the classical virtue of courage. Courage does not mean that you feel brave. Courage means that even when you're terrified, you stay at your post and you don't budge. Right? Does that make sense? The feeling is not bad, but it's different from the action. But guess what? If you keep acting in a courageous fashion, some of the feeling will come. Any military people there? Any veterans? Okay. If you ask almost any soldier, and you ask them, weren't you afraid? And they're like, yeah, of course. I was terrified. My knees were knocking. But so courage is not the feeling. It is, but I still stayed at my post and I didn't break and run. All right. Many of us, all of us probably at one time or another, love your enemies. What? That's impossible. Well, that's because we think that Jesus is telling us, have warm, fuzzy feelings towards your enemy. Well, that, folks, is impossible, okay? Love your enemies does not mean feeling nice and wanting them around. It means treating them in a loving manner, in a charitable manner. That's the difference. But here's the good news. Did any of your parents or grandparents ever tell you this? Virtue is its own reward. You ever heard that? Let me tell you what that really means. Virtue is its own reward. It means that the more you practice virtue, the more you enjoy virtue. You see? That's the reward. The more you practice the classical virtue of courage, the more you'll feel a sense of courage and bravery. The more you practice the theological virtue of love or charity, the more you're going to feel love. Now, We have, this is a little bit more mixed. I was just speaking at Second Baptist where everybody is either English, Dutch, or German, okay? There's still a lot of English, Dutch, German folks here. And I specifically say that because that's the part of the world that gave us the Protestant work ethic. Now, in many things, I think that's a good thing. It helped build this country, right? I think it's good to work, but we take it too far if you grew up with that, so that work becomes your entire identification. So I knew a lot of Dutch people when I was at the University of Michigan, because that's Dutch slang, Grand Rapids. I was just in Grand Rapids speaking, actually. And if you say to someone, you work hard, it's exactly the same thing as saying you're a good person. It doesn't make a difference what they do or what they did with their money working. Now, I want to get to something a little closer, though, because Immanuel Kant, the famous German philosopher, came up with something that I think has been very, very damaging to the church, and Lewis exposes this too 80 years ago. He's the one that had this idea that all there is duty. And how many of you grew up subtly thinking that if I'm doing charitable work and I'm enjoying it, then it's really not charity? The back, have you ever had that tug, right? This is only charity if I'm miserable, right? How many of you saw the movie Amistad? Okay, but Steven Spielberg's a while ago now. It's a true story of a slave ship where they revolted and escaped, and then they were put on trial. And there's a scene where a lot of the abolitionists, almost all of whom were Christians, were witnessing to them. They weren't Christian, giving them Bibles and things. And I'll never forget, just ingrain this in your head, right? These two people, the two slaves, they're speaking in another language, and one says to the other, "Are those the people they call Christians?" And he says, "Yes." And he says, the subtitle says, "Then why do they always look so miserable?" Okay? We could do this, okay? This is more white Christianity, okay? And when I say white, I mean northern, not Greeks. Greeks are more like Mexicans than they are like Dutch people, okay? We're always excited and having fun, okay? But there is that sort of thing, and you're never taught this, but it's instilled in you, right? If you're enjoying it, it's not charity. Listen to me, seriously, folks. If you've been working at a soup kitchen for 10 years and you still hate and resent the people you're helping, then you're not practicing the theological virtue of charity. Because if you were, it would be changing your heart as well. Now, we all have bad days. There are days when I don't like you people, but I'm just talking about a general change of heart. This is so important, because even more than when I was a kid, everything is about feeling now, right? And again, feeling is not bad. But actions need to drive feelings and not vice versa, right? Because if you hate somebody, you will start treating them. I'm sorry. If you treat somebody in an evil way, you will start hating them. If you treat them in a good way, you will start liking. This is the way the human machine works. This is the way we're wired. Our actions produce feelings. Let me be real specific here. I'm sure many of you have worked in an office. I'm sorry for that. You've worked in an office, right? And you've had a time when the manager was really, really nasty to one of the workers. And you might have thought to yourself, wow, now that he's been so nasty, I'll bet he'll start treating that employee much better. Is that what happens? No, it's the opposite, right? It's what we call cognitive dissonance. Oh my God, I treated you lousily. Now, that can't be because I'm a jerk. It must be because you deserve terrible treatment. And so a lot of times they will treat them worse because they were mean or unjust to them. When I was an undergraduate, I was a double major in English and history. And I read a book that I've never forgotten by Edmund Morgan called American Slavery, American Freedom. And you know what? He proved this. Racism did not lead to slavery in our country. Slavery led to racism. Now, how could you possibly prove that? I'll tell you how he proved it. He looked at all the journals and diaries and personal letters of people in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, right? And most people are honest in their letters, generally speaking. They don't think it's going to be published. And you know what he found? Before slavery was really instituted, when people spoke about black or white, they didn't really talk about color. It wasn't important. But guess what? As soon as slavery started, they started using the color as a negative thing. Why? Cognitive dissonance. If we're treating these people badly, it must be their fault. Okay? And remember, the whole world has always had slavery. But usually slavery is not race-based. It's usually prisoners of war. right? So in Rome, they did have black slaves, but they also had white slaves from England and white slaves from Germany, all over the place. So it wasn't, and in fact, as I try to teach my students, and I know this because I spent my life reading the classics, ancient Greece and Rome, there is no racism in the ancient world. Now, I mean that very literally. In the ancient world, people didn't judge you because of the color of your skin. But that doesn't mean they weren't prejudiced. We're all prejudiced, right? So a Roman or a Greek might look down on an African, but he didn't look down on an African because of the color of his skin. Why do you think they looked down on them? Because they were Roman, right? From their point of view, they were a barbarian. They had a lesser culture, whatnot. But it had nothing to do with the color of the skin. There was actually one African, emperor of Rome at one point, right? So again, I want to show you that when we treat people evilly, we start to think of them evilly. But thankfully, my friends, it also works the other way around, okay? What do? You've been married 25 years. Some of you have been married 50 years, okay? You've been married 25 years, and you suddenly say, you're the man, I don't think I love my wife anymore. No, don't feel that at all. What do? I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. For the next 30 days, treat your wife as if you love her. And guess what will happen if you do that for 30 days? You know what will happen? Yeah, the emotions will return. Now, for most Americans, that sounds unbelievably hypocritical. What's the word I want? Inauthentic, all of this sort of stuff. No, that's the way the human being works. Now, by the way, what I just told you was turned into a movie. You know what the movie's called? Yeah, come on, say it. Yeah, what's it?
I thought it was the Love Dare.
Oh, okay. The thing is called, but Fireproof is the name of the movie. But they did publish the book Love Dare, okay? Folks, that's how it works, okay? Now, nobody's made a movie like this anymore, okay? What about a woman who after 25 years says, I don't respect that guy anymore. No, I don't respect him anymore. What do? Spend the next 30 days treating your husband as if you respect him. And guess what? Those feelings will return. That's not inauthentic. That's not hypocritical. That's the way the human machine works when it works properly. Our actions should drive our feelings and not vice versa. Right? Do that. Now, ladies, I'm going to give you the biggest challenge you've ever had in your life right now. Okay? Don't answer out loud because I don't want to embarrass you. Just answer in your head. All right. Do you expect that you should have to earn your husband's love, or do you expect him to love you unconditionally? Now, come on. Every one of you is thinking, of course you want to be loved unconditionally. Now, here's the hard question. Don't answer out loud. Do you respect your husband unconditionally, or do you expect him to earn your respect? And I'm going to tell you right now, even the sweetest lady in the crowd is thinking in her head, he damn well better earn my respect. Okay? So you see, okay, it is difficult, but we've got to get this in our mind, okay? We talk so much about the word submission, which the most important word is respect, because there is nothing more unlovely than a woman who submits to her husband but doesn't respect him. That's called passive aggressive, and nobody wants to be with that woman. Nobody wants to be that woman, okay? So these are the important things, okay? When Paul is talking about that, it's not just a feeling, or it's not primarily a feeling, it's an action. But if you do the actions, the feelings will come. One of the reasons we've had so much problems for the last couple hundred years is not just America, the Western world in general. We have this idea that the only legitimate foundation for a marriage is this experience we call being in love. Now, I'm a romantic guy. I'm glad that we live in a country where, generally speaking, the emotion of being in love comes before the commitment. Okay? But that hasn't always been the case. Let me give you a better example of this, right? For many Americans, when they became a believer, there was an emotional experience that led to, but not for everybody, right? Sometimes the deeper love of Christ comes later, right? But like Lewis says, in Western society, it tends to come before. The feeling comes before the marriage or the commitment to Christ. But that hasn't always been the case. In fact, that's rather rare. In terms of human history, that's rather rare. Now, what's the danger of making the sole, or at least most important foundation of marriage, the experience of being in love? You know what that means? What does that mean? When you don't feel the warm fuzzies anymore, you can just leave. Whether you're the man, the woman, just leave. right? And we have this thing called no-fault divorce, and you can actually leave, okay? Because, I was just writing a paper about this. Texas says, right, it's what's called irreconcilable differences, right? If the marriage is insupportable and there's disharmony, it destroys the legitimate ends of marriage. That word legitimate, that's my whole essay, is on that word legitimate, right? That's dangerous. If the only legitimate grounds is a feeling, an emotion, it's not going to last, folks, okay? Virtue is a quality of character gained by practicing virtuous actions. So again, let us be challenged by this, whatever age we are, to remember this and not be driven only by our emotions, only our feelings. Stop, okay? Nancy Pearcey, many of you have heard of her. She wrote Saving Leonardo. She wrote, Total Truth, Finding Truth, Love Thy Body. She's got a new book coming out next year called Toxic Masculinity, where she's investigating this. And I was there because she's given some speeches. It doesn't come out till next week. She always does a until next year, long process of vetting it with people. And what she said is, if you really look, a couple hundred years ago, most of the parenting books were actually directed to the father rather than the mother. And an older understanding of virtue was that virtue is like mathematics. Okay? Virtue is an objective thing that you try to come into alignment with. The fancy phrase is ordo amoris, ordering your loves towards proper standard. But we have so emotionalized virtue that we've made it almost whatever we feel. It's called emotivism, is the philosophical word for that. Right? So, again, and I've been reading a very good book. If you want to read, it's not easy, but it is. It's understand. It's not like Charles Taylor, A Secular Age. Nobody can understand that. But this book is called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman, who's at Grove City, and it's very good. It's not easy, but it's accessible. And again, he just shows how we went from rational man to psychological man to therapeutic man, right? Everything's about therapy now. And it's a very good book. And he really traces he talks about the sexual revolution and stuff, but he traces it all the way on down, right? And you got to understand that it's we evangelicals who are guilty for gay marriage. Because as soon as we allowed no-fault divorce, once you said the only foundation of marriage is how you feel, has nothing to do with procreation or preservation of chastity or companionship or anything like that. And by the way, do you know who signed no-fault divorce into law in California? Who's our favorite conservative president? Ronald Reagan. Okay, still my favorite president. Everyone's, can't we have Trump, Ronald Reagan with an attitude. Can't we go back to Ronald Reagan, nice guy, and all that. But whatever. But he's the one that signed it into law when he was governor of California, right? So, in a sense, we're all guilty of this because we've all allowed ourselves to over-emotivize and personalize virtue, and it loses any standard. So this is dangerous, okay? Now, but let's get some help here from Lewis. Again, all of this is book 3 of Mere Christianity. These are 2 of the things that I learned from Lewis that blew my mind, and I'm so thankful. The first one is this. Lewis says, God does not judge us by our raw material. He judges us by what we do with it. Right? And Lewis makes it tough on us. How do you know what you would have done if you had the upbringing of some of Hitler's henchmen and then you were given absolute power? Now, that doesn't take away from the incredible sin they committed. But when Jesus says, judge not, part of the reason is because you have no idea of their raw material. Now again, you don't overlook sin, but you need to try to understand, right? In a letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King says something that I think he probably would have done it, but I wish he phrased it differently. He's arguing that sometimes it is right to break an unjust law like segregation. He said you have to be willing to take the consequences, but he was right. But then he illustrated by saying, if I lived in Europe, I would have hidden Jews in my attic. Now, if there was anybody that would have done it, it probably would have been him. But I would have preferred him to say, if I lived in Holland, I would like to believe I would have hid a Jew in my attic. But none of us really knows until we're tested. That's why, even though I'm a conservative guy, and I'm not a fan of the draft dodgers of Vietnam, I don't judge them because how do I know what I would have done, right? I wouldn't have even had to make the choice because I would have been in college, right? And I would have escaped the draft. Again, that doesn't say what they did is right. It's to get a right perspective so we understand. And the important thing is God understands. He knows what we're working with. He knows the broken bodies and broken minds and PTSD, all the things that we go through. He knows that. And there is grace for that, okay? Sin is still sin. But we have to understand all of us are struggling with different things. If you ever really sit down with people in your congregation and start talking, you'll find out, oh my gosh, I thought this guy had the perfect life. And then you're like, whoa, we all have deep hurts and deep betrayals and all of these sorts of things. Again, that's what, do not judge. That doesn't mean we don't say sin is sin. But be careful. Remember, I don't hear this very often. Did any of you grow up with the phrase, there but for the grace of God go I? Okay? We need to bring that phrase back, okay? Because that's it. It doesn't say that sin isn't sin, but it says understand what we struggle with. Here, okay, Lewis, before he became a believer, Lewis was a big advocate of Sigmund Freud. Now, once he became a believer, he of course rejected Freud's worldview and his presuppositions, but he still felt that there was, that you could do something with psychoanalysis, that psychoanalysis, hypnosis could be used in a good way. As a method, it was still helpful. A good example, I see no reason why Christians can't practice either meditation or even yoga, as long as we're not worshiping Hindu deities when we do yoga, right? We have to be careful because sometimes that's what you're doing. As long as we are, the practice itself, okay? All of the ancient saints and mystics of the church practiced those kind of, the deep breathing and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with the technique, but you can be careful. It's got to be focused on Christ. So, here, okay, can anybody tell me what acrophobia is? The fear. Oh, that's close. That's arachnophobia. But acrophobia, No, that's agoraphobia. But acrophobia, okay, acropolis means the high city. So acrophobia is vertigo, fear of heights, right? And I'm using that example because I'm really excited to go back and see my friends at McNeese State University, but I'm dreading it. Do you know what you have to go over to get to McNeese? You have to go over that bridge. Have any of you done it? When you go down I-10, you get into Louisiana after about 20 miles, that bridge, oh my gosh. The only way I can do it is I put down my visor, even if it's 8 o'clock at night, and I just look straight forward. And I'm sorry, but I look like one of those old ladies. Hey, man, and it's like, it's like you can't put your city on the other side of the bridge because you have to go over the bridge, and that thing is so deadly, okay? And my mother has it too. It's all got to do with sinuses because your center of balance is in your ears. You know that? They're called the semicircular canals. That's why, if you're like me, never do that thing you're supposed to do. When you blow your nose, do not hold one nostril and blow hard with the other one, or you will blow out your ears. Some of you that are healthy, it won't happen. But if you add it, then you're like dizzy for a while. Crazy. So we're fearfully and wonderfully made, okay? Anyway, so what's that? I-210. Oh, is that another one? Oh, somebody said that's what you can go around it. It's bad too, though, isn't it? Maybe not as bad? I'm not afraid of the bridge. Okay, but that bridge gets me. I love it! Let's fill in I'm not afraid of the bridge, girly man. Okay, so anyway. Oh, man. But I've made it over there. Oh, man. Then I don't mind the rest of Newton because you go over a swamp. I mean, you know that Houston is a swamp masquerading as a city. Louisiana is a swamp masquerading as a state. Okay, you know the difference there. But anyway, they're fun. I was just up speaking at the Anglican, what do you call that? What do you call the big church? What's the word I want? Cathedral. Thank you. I want cathedral. I couldn't remember that. Cathedral. Yeah, it's in Shreveport. Have you ever been there? St. Mark's. That was fun. They did that. They even put me in a robe. That was like, man, that was pretty wild with the rope around it. And it's like, oh man, So what are you gonna do? Get all the Baptist. Oh, Lou's going Catholic. Watch out. The Baptist see it there. So does he do a robe sometimes? Oh, he does. Oh, that's good. Oh, there you go. Put the robe on, man. It's good stuff. So acrophobia is the fear of heights. Now watch this, okay? Let's say I really have bad acrophobia, and I'm on a mountaintop, and there's a damsel in distress. I want to save her, but I can't because of my I just can't, right? I'll get all vertigo. Now, let's say I go to a therapist, a good therapist. He uses hypnosis, he uses psychotherapy, and he cures me of my acrophobia. Now, once he cures me of my acrophobia, does that make me courageous? It doesn't. All it does is put me on a level playing field with everybody else. Now, when I see the damsel in distress, I don't have that blockage caused by acrophobia, but I still have to choose the virtue of courage to reach out and help, even though I might fall over myself. Does it make sense? It's still, virtue is ultimately a choice. It's a harder choice for some of us, and it might even be an impossible choice if you have some kind of PTSD that just, you can't do it. You know, maybe they're screeching ambulances or something, and you have, a shell shock, as we used to say, from the Army. You might be paralyzed. You might not be able to do anything, right? But again, if you were cured of that, you would still have to make the choice to do something. Courage is still the action that you do, right? See, Lewis makes it simple, okay? We're on a continuum here, right? And Lewis is not talking about works righteousness. It's every choice we're making. It's not so much it's moving us towards heaven or hell. It's making us. Remember when we did Great Divorce? How I said heaven and hell are not so much destinations as they are processes. Heaven and hell is something we become. Well, that's it. Every time we choose ourselves and our sin and forsake virtue, Lewis says we're putting a twist inside of us. A twist, a twist, a twist. You know, a lot of those choices, you might become a different person than you are. Right? God's grace is wonderful, but be careful, right? You keep resenting and hating people, and you're going to be a totally different person. And it's going to be extremely hard to, it might actually be impossible to come back without a direct work of the Holy Spirit opening you up again. And that's difficult, right? Very difficult, but you can do it. All right, let me tell you the other thing I learned. So one, God does not judge us by our raw material, but by what we do with it. Here's the other one. Some of you already know this. We all know that as Christians, we're called to love the sinner, but hate the sin. Isn't that impossible? Come on, were you playing games with me? I can't hate the sinner, love the sinner and hate this. It's impossible. And then Lewis said, and it was like a light bulb going off. It's like, we all know how to love the sinner but hate the sin because we do it every day to ourselves, right? It's so simple. See, it's simple. It's only simple after someone says it, okay? That's what's wonderful about saying these wonderful intuitive things. It's only obvious after they've said it. So Aristotle had to teach us that a good tragedy has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? You've probably seen a lot of movies out of Hollywood that don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're all over the place, okay? So sometimes those simple things, right? So look, if I do something mean and nasty, I hurt somebody, right? I hate what I did, but I continue to love myself. In fact, the very reason I hate what I did is because I love myself and I know I'm better than that. I know that's not the person who God created. I know that it's making me a much worse person than I am. So we can do it, right? Again, this doesn't mean not calling sin sin, but it means that we can separate the two. And it also means if we're going to be judgmental, then our motivation better be love for the sinner, right? If you're a man, okay, and you're upset, let's say at homosexual sin, make sure it's not just because you're disgusted by it and offends you, okay? If you're going to be upset about it, it must be because you care about the person and you know this is self-destructive behavior. Just like any of your friends who have any kind of addictive behavior, whether it's drugs or alcohol, whether it's anger, whether it's envy, whether it's bitterness. If you really love them, you're going to call them on that because you know it's destroying them and the person that they are, the person that they're capable of being. So we've got to keep that in our mind. Look, Lewis says, you want a rule of thumb, sort of a way to measure this? All right, let's say there's a celebrity you really don't like. And then on the news or on the newspaper, if anybody reads the newspaper anymore, you find out that that person is even worse than you thought. And if that makes you happy, you're on the road to hell, Lewis says, okay? Now, let me just make this really, really personal to all of us, because we are living in a time where I don't think we've ever been more polarized, right? And I mean polarized over crazy things, okay? Like the whole COVID thing. So I've got, some of my fellow parishioners who are like, you better get that vaccine, you're going to die. And then you've got other people saying, if you do take the vaccine, you're going to die. They tell me you're going to go blind and then you're going to die. And don't sit next to me because you're shedding. I don't know what that means. But anyway, okay. Now, what's scary about this, okay? What's scary about this is we can get ourselves to a fever pitch. And I'm serious. And any of us can fall prey to this. Okay, let's say you're on the, COVID is the worst disaster of all time. Everybody has to be forcibly vaccinated, mask on. And then you find out that, the state of Texas, which has, is less strict about those things, suddenly had 2,000 people die of COVID. And if that actually makes you happy, that's really bad, okay? Or on the other side, let's say you're somebody that's really, really strongly against the vaccine. Nobody should take it. And then you read a statistic that 1,000 people took the vaccine and 500 died, and you're kind of happy about that? You see what I'm getting at? This is dangerous. I don't know if I talked about this before, but I want to urge you. This is something I had to learn. We all need to learn it. I don't think any of us in this room is as able as we think to filter out the stuff that we're hearing on the news and in social media. In other words, I can watch all of this stuff, whether it's Fox or MSNBC, whatever it is, on whatever side, I can listen to all of this, and it's not going to affect me. It's just not true, okay? The vast majority, if not every one of us, will be affected by that. And again, you can tell you're being affected because you meet a new Christian and your first thought is, liberal, conservative, Trump, Biden, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. That's really troubling, isn't it? Right? And what do I do when that happens to me? I fast. I don't mean from food. We're Baptists after all. I mean, we had barbecue last month. Man, give me that barbecue, okay? Look, there's a lot of Baptists. If there are no, covered dish luncheons in heaven, we're not going, okay? That's it, okay? If they don't have some good barbecue, okay? And in heaven, you can have barbecue and you can eat all the burnt carbon. Doesn't make a difference. No cancer. You can just eat it all, okay? It's wonderful. Yeah, it's good stuff. So they can deep fry everything in heaven. Deep fried Twinkies, whatever, okay? Oh my gosh. Deep fried butter. There it is right there. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like the Simpsons is still on. That show's been on for 30 years. He takes his pancake, he takes a stick of butter, he wraps the pancake, eats it like that, right? Should have deep fried it, then eat it, right? But it's crazy stuff. So anyway, but I forgot where I was now. Anyway, yeah, thank you. Then you got to fast from it, okay? One or the other. Just stop. I mean, literally, I would maybe do that for Lent or something like that because it does influence. And again, the real danger is, I'm serious, it can make us almost feel a wonderful sense of smugness when something happens to the enemy. And that's really bad, folks. I mean, that's really deep corruption of the human spirit. That's much worse than like sexual sin or something, folks. That's getting right to the core of who we are. So be careful, because none of us are immune. We really aren't. I mean, I've seen the sweetest grandmas that never cared a lick about politics getting really angry about like COVID and stuff. I've never seen it. Even my own mother, she's not getting really bad, but she never cared about that stuff. And all of a sudden, boom, and then this one over here and this one over there, and it's like, oh my gosh, just let it go. Again, but remember, if we are going to judge properly, we must be caring about the individual. That must be our first and foremost care of the individual. Okay, let me just say a few things and then we'll go. Okay, just quickly, let's talk a little bit about hope and faith. All right, faith, hope, and love. Remember, those are the three theological words. I think most people have a fairly good working knowledge of faith and of love, but hope is the lost one, right? For a lot of people, hope means pie in the sky, by and by. I never heard that till I came down south. Pie in the sky. You need a banjo. This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. Anybody play the ukulele here? Ukulele? You can buy this. I bought my daughter a banjolele. I'm not making that up. It's just like a ukulele. Does anybody know what makes a banjo a banjo? Instead of wood, you know what you're playing on? It's a drum head. That's why it has such a different sound. It's a drum head that you're doing the strings over. So it's really cool. So she already knows how to use the ukulele, and she can play the banjo the way you play ukulele rather than the way you play guitar. So it's a little bit easier. But a lot, like anybody that's a Marxist in any way hates hope. Because anybody that's a Marxist from either side wants to build utopia. And they don't like people that are interested in hope because they stop this building of utopia, right? Freudians also don't like hope because it's wish fulfillment, they would say. And yet, you know what the irony is, Lewis says? It's the people who had their eyes most fixed on heaven that made really good changes to the earth. Like the early Christians that got rid of the gladiatorial matches, that got rid of infanticide. The Christians that eliminated the slave trade. The abolitionists that eliminated slavery. The civil rights movement. All of those were by Christians who had their eyes fixed on heaven. Right? And because of that, they were able to do good on earth. Right? You know, a lot of people, I don't know if you've ever heard someone say this to you in so many words, you Christians are mercenary because you want heaven. There is nothing in heaven, real heaven, that a mercenary would desire. Okay, look, if a young man falls in love with this lovely girl, he gets to know her and all that sort of stuff, and he wants to marry her, is he mercenary because he wants to marry the girl he loves? He's not, because marriage is the natural telos of love. But if he wants to marry her for her fortune, then he's a mercenary, right? A soldier who wants medals is not necessarily a mercenary because the medals show forth your courage and your honor and your valor. But if you're doing it, this is a British thing, if you're doing it to get a peerage, Lewis says, you know, like land or something, then you're a mercenary because that's not the natural end of military courage. So heaven is the natural and proper reward because it means spending eternity with God. And finally, just quickly, faith. Now, faith is, of course, in part the moment we accept Christ. But it is more than that. We live by faith. Some of you in this room drive by faith. You scare me, okay? But we live. Ah, good. I'm waiting for it. It's great stuff. I love this lady. It's great stuff. We live by faith. See, there are a lot of people out there who think, you Christians, Christianity is something that you accept out of emotion and then you reject it because of reason. Now, Lewis says sometimes that happens, but much more often it's the opposite. We come to Christ because it makes sense, because it's reasonable, because it's coherent, but then we're a Christian. What happens? Somebody dies. We lose our job. We get cancer. And a spark of emotions goes off, and it makes us lose our faith. So it's more often emotion that makes you lose your faith rather than give you your faith. Right? Lewis says, does anybody remember far enough back when you went to the dentist and they gave you ether? Because now it's almost always an injection, right? But they put that mask down, right? And Lewis says that, you know, when I go to the dentist, I know rationally, I've studied it, I know that mask is not going to strangle me. I know that the ether is going to put me to sleep so I won't feel any pain. Well, that's what my mind tells me. But when I'm on the chair and the mask is coming down, a burst of emotional fear hits me, and I'm screaming. Right? You understand? So we understand that. And one other thing, Lewis says this in an essay he wrote called On Obstinacy in Belief. Wonderful. Christianity begins as a philosophical proposition, but it ends as a relationship. Right? So we are not just putting our faith in a philosophical system. We are putting our faith in a person, right? When Jesus says to Thomas, you know, Thomas, it's like he's saying, you should have known me better, Thomas, right? You should have understood who I am and that you can trust me, right? And again, there are people out there that expect that if you're a real Christian, you should be questioning your faith every single day. You should be continually trying to poke holes in it. Really? Let me end with an analogy. Imagine that same young man meets this beautiful girl, gets to know her family, they get married, they go away for a 2-week honeymoon, and then they come back, and immediately he starts tapping her phone and having her followed because he's sure that she's having an affair. Now, what would you think about a guy like that? You would think he was a jerk. You would say, really? If you didn't trust her, why did you marry her in the first place? Okay? Christianity it is intellectual, okay? But it is a trust in a person. You're not going to let us down. We trust. He rose from the dead. We can trust him, okay? But so, again, we've got to not allow ourselves to be browbeaten and made fun of because our hope and our faith and our virtue are somehow only feeling and nothing more. They're much, much deeper than that. They're much better founded than that. Lord God, I thank you so much. I thank you for this congregation, Lord. I thank you for the desire to read and learn and grow, for the desire to live a virtuous Christian life. Lord, help us here. Let us begin the healing of the wounds in our congregations. Let us put aside feelings of anger and smugness and live virtuously. Let us see people as individuals and not just members of some kind of group that we disagree with. Lord, let your Holy Spirit transform us. Let us act virtuously so that that virtue would sink deep into our hearts. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Good stuff. Do we have time for some questions?
Yeah, we'll take
Good.
just real quick here, a couple of questions. So I've been instructed that I will hold the microphone, and so that those online, let me first say to those online that I have my phone here, so you can text 832-607-9951 if you have a
Good
question.
stuff.
And I will repeat that for you. So that they can hear online and so it gets on the recording, I'm going to repeat your question, okay? And so if you have a question right now, let's go with Maria.
Yay.
At the end, you spoke of how, as Christians, we shouldn't be poking holes or immediately. But Lewis wrote in one of those chapters, and it really hit home for me, that he wrote that the Bible and God knows that He expects you to question
Good.
yourself and doubt. The doubt is not bad or it's not unusual, but that's why we go to church. That's
Good.
why we read our Bibles. That's why we try to congregate with other people that think like us, because it strengthens our faith. But when you
We can still question.
repeat her question?
Okay, yeah. That
I can't.
Oh, okay. it's right. We are not saying that we should have blind faith, right? We should question and grow. But if we are in Christ, we're questioning from a position of faith and promise, rather than just back and forth. Like every time something bad happens. I mean, first of all, yeah, like Jesus told us there's going to be suffering. He never said, your best life now. He never said that everything's going to go. He said the very opposite, right? You know, in fact, if nothing bad ever happened, we might be, oh boy, I'm in trouble. It's just like, what do they say about, San Francisco's due for a giant earthquake, right? Because every time we don't have an earthquake, it's getting bigger. So when it does happen, whoosh, right? We've got really good at stopping little forest fires, which means when the big forest fire comes, we're in big trouble and we can't stop it, right? But we do it. But you're right. And really, Christian fellowship is important, and I'll tell you there's many reasons why. But one reason Christian fellowship is important, especially if you go to college or something, is when you're all alone as a believer, it starts to seem unreal. Because, let's face it, Christianity is too good to be true. Christ died in our place, took our punishment, took our sin, gives us his righteousness. Isn't that a myth? Well, yeah, it's a myth that came true, right? The myth made fact. It's a wonderful, so we need that because you're just like if you were a woman, you were married to a soldier and he was away for a year, you would want to be with other members of his family or your family to remind you of that person and that you can trust that person. Now we're lucky we have Skype and Zoom and things like that. It's much better. That's the best thing that ever happened to missionaries, isn't it? Used to be you saw no family for years and years. Now you can see them probably more than you want, actually. They never leave you alone, right? And the oh my gosh, my crazy uncle who never seemed to care about anything. Anytime there's some hurricane in Houston, I get a phone call. It's like, this is Houston. That happens every day, okay? And it's like, maybe you care too much, but go ahead.
Chris, go ahead. You want to take the mic?
So you spoke a lot about virtue, Dr. Markos. What would you tell parents about but you've learned about formation of virtue, right?
Oh, that's a good one. How do you form virtues? And again, that's a slow process, but the classic way of teaching virtue is through story. But read them good story, not the politically correct fables that we get today. Read them, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, because that's how you embody virtue, by showing that to them, right? The best way to teach your children the dangers of lying is to teach them the boy who cried wolf. You remember the first time you heard that? That scared me. It scared my son. That was like, whoa. He kept trying to save the boy. Sorry. Wolves ate him. Oh, and he's a good kid, but I mean, you do that. Now, of course, number one, we have to model virtue, right? And we have to model virtue as a positive thing and not a negative thing. They need to see it as something beautiful. Like, don't spend all the time telling your kids what not to listen to. Put on good music and listen to it with them, right? Show them that virtue is lovely. Screwtape, the devil, he says, we like wars. There's lots of killing and violence, and there's lots of despair. But watch out. Wars are dangerous from the devil's point of view. Because suddenly, people have given up on courage, and then suddenly there's a war, and suddenly the virtue of courage becomes beautiful again. And maybe it's important, and maybe those manly virtues are good again. And but with kids, it's a slow thing. You teach them through story. That Bill Bennett has the Book of Virtues, which was very helpful. But take them to the actual myths and talk about decision making, so they can see why it's important to do this rather than to do that. But remember, if, like your son, let's say, does something really bad, I'm ashamed of you. You were irresponsible. But then you hug them and say, but I love you and you are valuable. You don't hug them and say, it's no big deal. Because actually, it is a big deal. But what you're telling them is, what you did was disappointing. But I love you, and I know you can be better than this. So it's got to be that. It's got to be love the sinner and hate the sin. They need to know that you love them and actually have higher expectations of them that you want them to live up to. But that means when they do something virtuous, you better stop and praise them. I don't mean you have to bribe them. Just praise them, okay? You can never spoil a child with love and good praise. And let them say it, and let them, let them go like that, right? Let them feel that way. You were heroic today. So, but it's a slow process. And also, by the way, when we do something bad, we need to explain it to them, okay? I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have yelled. That was wrong. I really love your mother, your father, whatever. I shouldn't have done that. That doesn't mean we're in a continual confessional to our child. You can overdo that, okay? But they need to understand that you're struggling too, right? I mean, we wouldn't go too far. But what's that? Yeah. The kid comes to me. Somebody over here.
One of the things that I think that young people are looking for is truth.
Good.
And one of the things that they found lacking sometimes in the church is the lack of clarity in speaking that truth. And so my question is, I don't feel good when I know that I hear a parent say, "Oh, my child has decided to be transgender,"
or something, right? Yeah.
That does not make me feel happy. That makes me hurt for that parent. Start praying for that parent. So as we were talking, if we don't speak up, then things will happen. Like, Reagan maybe should have stood up to that no-fault divorce that caused this landslide. Today, as a grandma who's lived a while, it is hard to know when to speak up, because many times that we're hearing, well, you're a Christian, you shouldn't speak up so much, you seem so hateful. But how do we balance that? I mean,
it's good, yeah. And we want to be like in the case of transgender.
How are we solved?
Sit down there and explain to them the goodness of either masculinity or femininity. Like, stop telling you what you're against. And I just remember, it stuck in my mind because I thought it was so cool. I remember one of my colleagues a long time ago talking about potty training his daughter, and the daughter had a brother. And she's like, well, why can't I stand up and go to the bathroom like he does, right? That this could be like the beginning of transgenderism right here, right? And he tried to explain, well, look, this is a good thing. It means you have to stop and be slow and not be rushing around like he just tried to put it, I know it's kind of silly, but he's trying to, even potty training, put it in a positive way. How can you use this gift that God has given you? And this is very important too, especially with a boy, because now we're telling the boy that if he likes, quote, girl things, he must really be a girl. And say, no, this is okay. You can like beautiful things, but try to make it a positive thing, right? And you can even make it a masculine thing, right? Show him some masculine artists who love beauty or something like that. The same thing with it. But we're so negative on things. Let's help them to grow into the goodness of let's call it the gift of gender or something like that. Good.
Isn't there also we all have masculine?
Good. We have different traits. We have traits. Good.
And let the child realize that this is quite natural.
Good.
And that this is a part of being human.
Good. And it's because it's just a kind of a funny thing. Just you can help them to see differences. For instance, a lot of times, we think of the woman that likes to cook, okay? But there are men that like to cook, but I'll show you the difference, okay? When I see a man that fancies himself a chef, whether he is or not, okay, what's interesting about that guy is when he's the only person home, he still spends all day making something beautiful. The woman, I'm home by myself. I'm going to order McDonald's because for most women, cooking is not an end in itself. It is providing food for the family. You see what I mean? That we can both do similar things, but we can express them in different ways, and that's positive, right? It's not negative.
What
Good?
about in society, though? Take it
It's
out
crazy,
of the
yeah.
family. Because, yes, we should handle it that way with our own children. But in society, as this is being agreed to and as laws are being passed, shouldn't we be standing up?
I think we should speak up as much as we can and risk being, humiliated maybe.
Sometimes the truth upsets people.
Right.
And that doesn't bother me.
Right.
I'll speak the truth because my grandchildren are watching.
Now we have to we earn the right to speak truth by showing the real love that we have, let's say, for the gay and lesbian community, right? In other words, do we love these people as people, and we're not wanting them as consumers or something like that, right? Where nobody really cares. They want your money and stuff like that. So if we show that we have always been caring about the individual, then I think we earn a voice, right?
I have a gay person in my life that loves me very much as a person, and I love him. But he fully understands what I think of his lifestyle. And we're very honest, about it. And I feel that some of this stuff that's happened is because as Christians we've been silenced. We've been so afraid of being told that we're hateful when we're not trying to be hateful.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't trying to be hateful, but they still put him on that
Yeah,
cross.
and he was strong. I mean, we always think of Jesus meek and mild, but look at the way he spoke to the Pharisees and some of the other ones. One of my favorites is when Jesus is attacking the Pharisees, and one of the scribes says, "Master, when you speak like that, you insult us too." And then he starts railing at them. I think that's a little joke. As a matter of fact, you guys are, and actually remember when he says, why did the Tower of Siloam fall on those people? Was it because they were right or wrong? And he says, it wasn't because they sinned or not, but be careful that you don't sin. Jesus doesn't take off the responsibility. He just says it's not always ours to know what a simple cause and effect is. Okay, but watch yourself at the same time.
Pardon me?
Go good.
We're going to wrap up right now. Is it, you ask questions afterwards, okay?
Okay.
So, did you have one more? Did you have a comment you said? I was just going to say the thing. I
Good.
thought the great thing that you said what Lewis brought up about the smugness.
Yeah.
That is
Oh.
always a danger. And
Yeah, you can see it.
We see that and we say that, but we got to point back
Right.
to ourselves. And if we don't, we're Pharisees.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me dismiss us, and then you're welcome to ask Dr. Markos questions on the way out.
You want to get dinner?
At the restaurant we're going. tortilla. Anybody wants?
And we're not going to fast.
And we will next month. We will have a robe for you to wear.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'll have my robe.
We can't let the Episcopalians, right?
That's right. They can't do it.
One up us. So,
I think I did have him take a picture of me. Let me see if I can find it. I'll pass it around so you can see the wonderful picture of Lou the monk. You know.
Dr. Markos already prayed, so we are dismissed. And give him a big hand, please.
Thank you all. And come next. There it is.